The storyteller says it was 11 o'clock p.m. and Layla's phone screen was lighting up the dark room with a faint blue glow as she scrolled through profiles on the Night Owl app, trying to find something to fill the void left by her daily routine. Because she wasn't looking for love, but rather an experience or a light adventure to break the boredom when she stopped at a profile named Alex, whose picture was captivating with a mysterious smile and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen. And as a software engineer in her late 20s, whose life revolved around code and meetings, she was looking for something completely different. So she hit the like button, and within seconds, she received a notification saying that Alex liked her profile too, and the conversation began to flow smoothly. As Alex was intelligent, eloquent, and had a quirky sense of humor that she liked, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing, until Layla felt an invisible bond forming between them. And after a week of constant conversation, Alex suggested a meeting, asking why don't we go for a short hike in the nature reserve near the city, in a message saying the weather is perfect these days and the fresh air will change your mood. And Layla hesitated for a moment, because the forest at this time of year could be desolate, especially with someone she had never met before. But her curiosity was stronger than her caution. So she said, okay, but let's meet at the main entrance and don't forget to tell me your car specifications. And they agreed to meet on Saturday at noon. Layla arrived at the main entrance of the forest right on time, and the place was eerily quiet as she didn't see Alex's car or any other car except for her own. So she waited for 10 minutes, then 15, and started feeling resentful, wondering if he had stood her up. Then she took out her phone to call him, but the signal was very weak, and she thought about leaving. But then she caught a glimpse of an old black car parked far away, half hidden among the trees. And since this wasn't the car Alex had described, she ignored it and decided to give him 5 more minutes. Lila arrived at the main forest entrance right on time, and the place was eerily quiet as she didn't see Alex's car or any other car except for her own. So she waited for 10 minutes, then 15, and started feeling resentful, wondering if he had stood her up. Then she took out her phone to call him, but the signal was very weak, and she thought about leaving, but then she caught a glimpse of an old black car parked far away, half hidden among the trees, and since this wasn't the car Alex had described, she ignored it and decided to give him 5 more minutes. Suddenly her phone rang, and it was a message from Alex saying, "I am here waiting by the large tree with the scratch on its trunk. Look to your left." So Layla looked to her left, but there was no large tree matching that description nearby, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she turned around and saw a man getting out of the old black car she had spotted earlier, wearing a low baseball cap that hid his features and walking with slow, heavy steps toward her. And he didn't look like the Alex from the photos at all. Lila tried to back away toward her car, but the man began to quicken his pace, and she heard his gruff voice calling her name, saying, "Layla, wait." So she rushed toward her car, but her hands were shaking as she tried to unlock it, and the man reached her and grabbed her shoulder firmly, asking, "Where are you going?" "I've waited for you for a long time." And his voice was completely different from what she had imagined through his messages. So Layla pushed him with all her might and ran toward the forest in the opposite direction of her car, which was a strange decision, but fear had blinded her judgment, and she heard his heavy footsteps behind her, along with the sound of a muffled laugh. Layla ran through the tangled trees with branches, scratching her face and arms as she heard his voice calling her one moment, and then his footsteps going silent the next, which only doubled her terror, making her wonder if he was hiding or trying to trap her. So she stopped to catch her breath under a massive oak tree and tried to call the police, but there was no signal at all, and she felt despair creeping in, when suddenly she heard a voice behind her asking, "What are you looking for, Layla?" And her blood froze as she turned slowly to see the man standing just a few meters away, with his eyes gleaming in the shadows. and in his hand was a small knife, reflecting the dim sunlight, filtering through the leaves. Layla started screaming at the top of her lungs and ran again, but she tripped over a tree root and fell hard, feeling a sharp pain in her ankle. And as the man tried to catch up, she crawled away quickly, driven by survival instinct, when she heard the familiar sound of an approaching engine, which was a SUV, a jeep, and the man looked up, appearing confused as the jeep pulled up beside her, and a tall man in athletic gear stepped out, asking, "Are you okay, miss? Is there a problem?" And his face was strangely familiar. At that moment, the man who was chasing her realized that this jeep wasn't just a passing car, because it was being driven by Alex, the real Alex, with the same mysterious smile and sharp eyes she had seen in his profile picture. And Alex looked at the unknown man with a piercing gaze, his expression turning to one of pure disgust, as he said in a cold and terrifying tone, "Are you here again? Richard, didn't I tell you to stay away from me and my dates?" And the man chasing Layla panicked, retreating slowly before running off and vanishing into the trees. Lila looked at Alex, her face pale from shock and fear, asking in a trembling voice, "Who is he, and what did he want?" So Alex sighed and explained that this was Richard, an old stalker who had been obsessed with him for a while, using dating apps to stalk his dates by constantly changing his profiles to impersonate him. And he told her he was so sorry and should have warned her, but he was searching for her in the forest. After she didn't show up at the entrance, as he reached out his hand to help her up, and though Alex was polite and kind, Layla couldn't shake the terror that had taken hold of her, because in that moment she realized the virtual world carries real monsters that can cross the screen to haunt you in the strangest places. And Layla was never able to use a dating app again after that night, as every mysterious smile and every attractive photo now hid the terrifying face and sharp eyes of Richard. The storyteller says my name is Sami, and I used to live in a spacious apartment, larger than I ever needed, on the 10th floor of an old building in the city center, where the place was deathly quiet, and the silence was only broken by the faint whistle of the wind leaking through window cracks, or the occasional groan of the old elevator as it slowly climbed and descended. And after moving for a new job in a strange city, I found myself completely alone, spending long nights staring at the ceiling of my room, listening to my own heartbeat as I tried to convince myself I wasn't afraid, because loneliness was slowly consuming my soul. So I decided to look for a glimmer of hope, or perhaps just a temporary companion on dating apps. And after weeks of boring swiping and cold messages, I stopped at a profile for a girl named Sarah, whose photos were captivating with a gentle smile and wide eyes. But what really caught my interest was the uncanny similarity between our interests, as she loved the same classic movies I adored and read the same complex detective novels, and even her taste in music was surprisingly identical to mine. So our conversations began to go beyond the usual, and we felt as if we had known each other for a long time. Then I agreed with Sarah that she would come over to my apartment for dinner and a movie, and I was so excited since this was my first date in this city. And when the doorbell rang, I felt my heart race, and I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, even more beautiful than her pictures, with dark hair falling over her shoulders and eyes deeper than I had imagined. But there was something cold in her gaze, a strange glint that gave me a slight chill. I ignored it, chalking it up to first date nerves. During dinner, Sarah ate very slowly, and her eyes wandered around the apartment with a scrutinizing look as she began asking very specific questions about my life that weren't ordinary at all, asking who lives with you in this building, and are they close by? And do your friends visit you suddenly? Or do they have a spare key? And does anyone know I am here tonight? Or is it just a surprise? And her questions were punctuated by a faint smile that made me feel a hidden tension, though I tried to sound natural, replying that no, I live here alone, and nobody knows you're here tonight, except for you and me. After dinner, we sat in the living room to watch the movie, and I felt a dryness in my throat. So I went to the kitchen to get some water, and when I returned, I found Sarah standing in the middle of the room, slowly touching the walls of the apartment with her fingers, as if she were inspecting every corner, every piece of furniture, and every object. And the scene was very strange. So when she saw me, she smiled coldly and said in a low voice, "Your apartment is very isolated, and no one will hear anything from here, which is truly wonderful." And those words were enough to freeze the blood in my veins, as I suddenly felt a harsh cold sweeping over me, not from the air, but from a deadly internal feeling. At that exact moment, my phone rang in my pocket with a notification from the dating app itself, and I hesitated before opening it while my hands were shaking. And when I clicked the notification, a new message appeared from Sarah saying, "I am so sorry, Sammy, my car broke down on the way, and I won't be able to come tonight. So maybe we can postpone the date to another day." And I froze in my place, staring at the screen, then slowly raising my eyes to the woman standing before me in the middle of my living room, wondering who she was then. Her cold smile widened even further, turning into something like a silent laugh, with no sound coming out, but her eyes were gleaming with a diabolical brilliance, as her face began to change slowly, as if she were taking off a mask, and her features began to stretch, her skin wrinkled, and her eyes widened unnaturally, and her face was melting before my eyes, transforming into something else, something not human. As she said in a rough voice, unlike the Sarah I had talked to for hours, that I chose you, Sammy, because no one here will look for you for several days. The world turned upside down, and terror drove me to madness as I screamed at the top of my lungs and tried to dash towards the door. But she was faster moving with an unnatural lightness, as if she glided through the air, and she stood between me and the door, saying, "You can't leave now, Sammy. The date isn't over yet." So I started running frantically inside the apartment, from the living room to the kitchen, and then to the bedroom, while she chased me slowly with calm and calculated steps, as if she were enjoying the hunt, because she knew every corner of the apartment and every hiding spot better than I did. I grabbed my phone, trying to call the police, but the screen suddenly went dark and the power was cut from the entire apartment as total darkness took over, and the sound of my cat, Luna, screaming from under the bed pierced the air, a scream unlike anything I had ever heard before. Then I felt a cold hand touch the back of my neck, and the phone slipped from my hand. The next day, the neighbors found the door to Sammy's apartment slightly ajar, and the apartment was empty, with no trace of Sammy or even his cat Luna. Only Sammy's phone was lying on the floor, with its screen lit up by a single message from the real Sarah, saying, "I am truly sorry for cancelling the date yesterday. Are you okay? I couldn't reach you." But what was truly terrifying was the reflection of the mysterious woman in the broken phone screen, her face distorted and her eyes gleaming as if she was still watching from behind that phone screen, the one that stole Sarah's features to haunt Sammy. And who knows, maybe she is still looking for a new date. The storyteller says, "My name is Adam and I work as a photographer, where my lens has always been drawn to places forgotten by time, like abandoned houses, rusty factories, and narrow alleys untouched by footsteps. And perhaps this curiosity was what finally led me to Lena, whom I met through a dating app. But her profile was anything but ordinary, as there were no cliché selfies, but rather a collection of artistic black and white photos of old buildings and silent statues. And our conversations were philosophical and deep, making me feel for the first time that someone understood my obsession with the past. After weeks of talking, Lena suggested a different kind of meeting, saying, "My family owns an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, in an area called the Alley of Oblivion, so why don't you come for dinner and photograph the mansion, because it is a treasure for any photographer, and I didn't hesitate for a moment since the idea of photographing a place no one had seen before was too tempting, so she gave me the coordinates and I set off on that foggy night where the further I drove from the city centre, the more the lights dimmed and the roads grew rougher, until I found myself in front of a giant iron gate covered in rust and climbing plants. Behind the gate was a majestic mansion rising through the fog like a Victorian ghost, and there were no lights in the windows except for a faint glow coming from the ground floor. Then Lena greeted me at the door, wearing a long black lace dress with a face that was unnaturally pale and eyes that were terrifyingly wide as she said in a voice as quiet as a whispering wind, "Welcome, Adam. We have waited for you for a long time." And before I entered, she made a strange request, saying the house rules require leaving your phone at the entrance because we sanctify privacy here. So I hesitated, but my professional curiosity outweighed my caution, and I placed my phone in a wooden box by the door and stepped inside. Inside the mansion, the air was heavy with the scent of ancient incense and dust, and the place wasn't abandoned as it had appeared from the outside, but was filled with luxurious furniture, covered in red velvet, as Lena led me to the dining room, where I was struck with amazement by a very long wooden table, set with 12 expensive plates and burning black candles, yet there was no one but us. So I asked, "Where is your family?" And she gave a cold smile, saying, "They are always here, even if you don't see them." And we sat down to begin dinner, but the food tasted strange, being repellently salty and metallic. As I tried to pretend to eat, I began to hear whispering voices coming from behind the wooden walls, faint sounds as if hundreds of people were talking at once in incomprehensible words. So I looked around, and it seemed to me that the shadows in the corners of the room were moving and growing larger, and when I asked Lena if she heard, that she didn't answer but instead stared at me with frozen, unblinking eyes. And suddenly, I felt a severe dizziness, as if the room began to spin around me. So I tried to stand up, but my body was so heavy, as if gravity had suddenly doubled. I apologized to her and said I would leave because I didn't feel well, and I walked with difficulty toward the entrance, only to be shocked by something terrifying because the hallway I had entered through was no longer there, and instead there was a long wall covered in photographs. So as I approached, my heart nearly stopped as I realized they were my photos, the ones I had taken throughout my professional career. But in every single photo in the dark corners behind the people I had photographed, there was a mysterious entity with distorted features standing right behind me, as if this thing had been watching me in every photo of my life, and I had never realized it. I began to scream and call out for Lena, but my voice bounced back with a strange echo, so I ran through the dark corridors, searching for an exit, yet every door I opened led to other, even stranger rooms, until I found myself in a room filled with large glass jars, and inside each jar was a preserved human face that seemed to be screaming in silence, with eyes that followed my every movement. And I realized then that the Alley of Oblivion wasn't just a name, but rather the place where people chosen by this cult disappear. Suddenly, all the candles went out, and I heard heavy footsteps approaching, along with Lena's voice singing an ancient funeral dirge saying, "You are part of our collection now, Adam, and your lens will immortalize us forever." Then I felt cold hands grabbing my shoulders from the darkness, and I tried to resist, but the dizziness overwhelmed me, and I collapsed onto the floor. And before losing consciousness, I caught a glimpse of Lena standing over me, but her face was no longer her own, as it had transformed into that distorted entity I had seen in my photographs. I woke up sitting in my car at the city entrance, just as dawn was beginning to break on the horizon, with my head throbbing with pain. And at first I thought it was just a nightmare, but when I looked at the passenger seat beside me, I found the wooden box where I had placed my phone, so I opened it with trembling hands, and instead of my phone, I found my old camera, and I turned it on to look at the last photo taken, which showed me asleep on the dining table in the mansion, surrounded by 11 people wearing masks made of human skin, while Lena stood right behind me, holding my hand and carrying a long knife coated in a black substance. I tried to return to the Alley of Oblivion with the police, but we found nothing, as there was no mansion, no iron gate, and not even a road leading there, because maps showed that the area was just a dense forest that no one had entered for decades. And my phone is still turned off, and every time I try to call my number, I get a reply in Lena's calm voice, saying thank you. For the visit, Adam, the photos will be wonderful, and since that night I haven't been able to sleep, because I always feel a coldness behind my neck, and whenever I take a photo of anyone, I close my eyes in fear that I might see that entity standing behind me again, waiting for the moment I return to finish the dinner.